Illinois politicians react to a Supreme Court choice, and the governor's race heats up. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. The legislature isn't in, but campaigns are going on. The president has been busy. We'll talk about some of that. And here to talk about it with me today, Brian Mackey of NPR Illinois at the State House. Welcome back, Brian.
Hey, Bernie.
And it's an all-public radio plus me show today. Daisy Contreras is also here, State House reporter, also for NPR Illinois, also known as WSIU. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So it seems, the way news happens these days, it seems like a long time ago, but the president, Trump, named Brett Kavanaugh, conservative judge, I believe D.C. Circuit, to the U.S. Supreme Court. Brian, give a little thoughts, I guess. While only U.S. senators have a true say in what will happen, we've started to see TV ads on private stations. The two U.S. senators from Illinois are both Democrats, not necessarily expected to be in his corner, but the governor candidates weighed in too.
Yeah, everybody who wants to make a little mark in politics has weighed in on this, whether they have a vote or not. But as you said, only the senators get to vote, and both Senator Durbin and Senator Duckworth were not really enthusiastic this week. Senator Durbin, in his initial response, didn't even include the sort of boilerplate you say, well, I'll consider his qualifications. Kavanaugh has been through the confirmation process before, and he's particularly tangled with Durbin before. Back in 2004, there was a video making the rounds this week of his confirmation hearing from 2004 where Durbin referred to him as the Zelig or Forrest Gump of politics, conservative politics, because Kavanaugh had a knack for being involved in some of the more controversial things that were happening in the late 90s and early 2000s. He was a member of the Bush administration. He had been involved somehow with the Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban boy who was taken from his family in the States and returned to Cuba. And he had also been involved in the investigations around former President Bill Clinton.
Yeah, with the Kenneth Starr investigation.
Exactly. So he is a polarizing figure, as you would expect, because the president promised to nominate people who would be very conservative and work with this sort of Federalist Society list. So,
okay, on the Daisy, the governor candidates weighed in, and Governor Rauner, I think, said, he's a good man, good record. He deserves a quick confirmation,
right,
which is different from what a lot of Democrats are saying.
I mean, as it's expected in an election year. Both candidates weighed in. J.B. Pritzker called on Rauner to oppose this nomination. And like you said, Bernie, Governor Rauner said, I'm looking forward to a fair hearing. And I mean, he wasn't the only one. Erica Harold, the Republican nominee for Illinois Attorney General, also kind of said something along the same lines. She's open to looking at his credentials and looking at where he stands. But Democratic State Senator Kwame Raoul, who's her opponent, said no.
Right, and he's from Chicago and she's from Urbana, and that's going to be an interesting race to watch, kind of second tier, but Attorney General issues, legal issues this year have a lot going for him. So,
well, and as Daisy said, the governor called for a fair hearing and a swift vote on his nomination. He didn't really call for his confirmation, is the way Governor Rauner is always sort of cautious and can be a little vague in his public pronouncements, but I think it's interesting that Senator Durbin was sending a message to his supporter list, not his press list, but the people who sign up for dickdurbin.com updates or whatever, saying, sign this petitions saying that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, ought to stick with the same practice he employed when President Obama was denied a hearing for his nominee at the end of his presidential term.
Right. Illinois.
We ought to wait until after the election is what Senator Durbin is saying.
Yes, but is it, I mean, obviously the Republicans would say, well, that was a presidential election. This is only a congressional election. The Senate might change, but we're not going to get a new president. And clearly getting a new president meant we got a different kind of philosophical background to the nominee for the Supreme Court.
No, definitely. But I mean, it was a strong departure from norms for the Senate to not even consider that nomination. I mean, and
that was almost a year that they held it.
Yeah, and it was longer certainly than the time between now and when the election
Well,
is.
I've also heard Senator Durbin say on TV, let's not, us Democrats, get our hopes up that we can block the Republicans.
Well, they don't have a majority.
They have
Yeah.
51 members, although we don't know about the health
Yeah,
of
I
John
mean, and,
McCain.
and speaking of petitions, Brian, you mentioned petitions are circulating everywhere, trying to get this nomination out of question, and there's this concern that he could be that kind of like lead person to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that's I think the major concern here.
Yeah, so abortion rights activists have tried to make this point, had a press conference calling on Governor Rauner to sign a pledge not to change what he did last year by signing House Bill 40, which allows some public funding of abortion. And the governor's response through his team or somewhere was, I signed the bill, there's no need to sign
Right.
a pledge, that's a political stunt. And that's the kind of...
Well, we can talk about another one later. There's a lot of political stunt pledges going on.
The head of the
this week.
pro-choice group is Terry Cosgrove, who was actually, when I was at the U of I on the Daily Illini, he was the head of the student association, so if I remember, or the student government at U of I. So it's been a few years. It was in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
He got really active after that. And still.
it is a little odd that the governor actually signed this bill. It's one of the more controversial things he did. He stuck to his principles. He apparently went back on a word that he supposedly gave to the Cardinal of Chicago.
Or at least the Cardinal said he broke his word. We don't. Yeah.
Right. Well, so
we've
yeah.
never been told exactly what the conversation between those two was, but the governor's office had announced he would veto it, and then he said he had talked to enough women and people in situations that he decided to sign it.
And this seems to be something that is truly in his heart. We don't often get to see things like, where are his true principles, because he is so strictly on message and talking about the economics issues and the laws he wants to change. But this is something where he has been consistently favoring abortion rights in Illinois. And so, for this petition to come out and want him to sort of denounce it a little further, I think we've talked in the past about, it's never going to be enough for the other side, because they're always going to try and make an issue out of it.
It's clearly political season,
Yeah.
and J.B. Pritzker made an issue. He was at the state AFL-CIO headquarters in Springfield when he signed this pledge some weeks ago, right after, they said, oh, we're in trouble with the Supreme Court anyway, and let's have a pledge about, keeping abortion rights in Illinois. House Bill 40, by the way, one of the things that it does is, if the U.S. Supreme Court were to overturn Roe versus Wade, the initial designation of House Bill 40, the key thing that people were pushing was, it will keep abortion rights legal in Illinois even if the feds turn it back to the states. Mm-hmm. So it avoids like a trigger, they called it, that a federal overturning of Roe versus Wade could somehow undo abortion rights in Illinois. It said they will stay. And so the people who passed it, in addition to then offering taxpayer-paid abortions and state insurance abortions, basically it's a guarantee that Illinois will stay where it's at, and we're doing it as an example, the proponents said, for other states where we feel that women should have also the right of choice.
And it's a tricky, I think, situation, I guess, for Rauner as well, because, this is a topic that's dear to him, but at the same time, many say that this is something that caused his Republican base to part ways with him, especially the more conservative Republicans out there.
Okay.
So.
Well, I didn't know if it was going to come near the top of the show, but as long as we're on a social issue, I will mention that it made the rounds a bit on social media this week and in the newspapers as well, particularly in Chicago, and a statewide conservative or Republican website, which one's it called? Illinois Review. The governor, there was a picture going around of him officiating at a wedding between two men. One of them is Mark Cozy, who is a longtime friend of his, who he appointed to the State Board of Investment and now to the Illinois, I believe it's State University's retirement system. Governor didn't make a big deal out of this, but the people who are on the conservative right, particularly a guy named David Smith, who runs the Illinois Family Institute, very conservative organization, put out a tweet, "Keep poking social conservatives in the eye, Bruce, you are doing a yeoman's job of alienating the base." Certainly, on the other hand, people who might not usually speak well of Governor Rauner, Democrats, but also, gay rights activists were pleased that the governor would see a wedding as a wedding. Thoughts on this one, and where does this, in fact, in a highly charged political situation where the governor is actually appearing at the end of the week this week, introducing Mike Pence, the vice president, in the Chicago area for a event to highlight tax reform that the Trump administration passed. The governor has been edging more towards saying Trump has done some good things when for so long he wouldn't even mention the president's name. But then you have, something like this where he shows that he believes enough in same-sex marriage to officiate for a friend.
Yeah, apparently he campaigned saying he didn't have a social agenda, and it seems that in terms of what the traditional Republican social agenda is, which is not allowing same-sex marriage, typically, although there were a handful of Republicans who broke with that, but not allowing same-sex marriage, restricting abortion rights, he is not on board with that agenda. And as Daisy said, that did cost him in the primary. He narrowly won the primary election. I do think it's interesting, though, that he was fairly clear on the abortion issue. People knew in the last election what they were getting with him. He was very circumspect about same-sex marriage in 2014. It was still a pretty new issue. The bill had just been signed into law within the previous year when the primary election was happening last time around. And I can remember at the Chicago Tribune editorial board, there was a forum, and one of the people, you don't get to see who were asking the questions, but I think it was Bruce Dold, who was then the editorial page editor, now the editor of the Chicago Tribune, saying, really pressing him on this question of same-sex marriage. What do you think? Is it right that the state pass this law? What do you feel in your heart? I remember that. What do you feel in your heart? And the governor just refused to answer. And this is a pattern we've seen repeat itself. He doesn't really want to stake out positions on a lot of these social issues until he's forced to. And as you said, he didn't publicize this, but he does appear to be legitimately moderate on some of these issues.
And then we saw last year he signed LGBTQ legislation. One of them was allowing transgender individuals to change their name on their birth certificate. So, before, gay rights activists were very against him. They, because he wouldn't be clear on where he stood on the issue. But he might be getting some more support in that sense based on the legislation that he has signed so far.
Yeah, and we'll see where that goes, because
Right.
it would be, clearly J.B. Pritzker, the Democratic candidate, is very socially liberal and all this stuff, and then you've got the other X factor in the race of Sam McCann, who's running on the Conservative Party. He's a Republican. He's running as a third party, and he named it the Conservative Party, and Cash Jackson, the Libertarian. So there will be more choices for people on the right who may necessarily not like Bruce Rauner. And for people on the left, it'll be interesting to see if something like this could move their votes there, or if they would go with Pritzker, who is also very strongly, for gay rights and choice rights on abortion.
And as long as you mentioned it, Senator McCann did have a sort of quick response this week to this issue. He, at least as reported by Rich Miller on his Capitol Facts website, he said, quote, "Out of respect for a private couple, I'd reserve my comment to Bruce Rauner. You're fired."
Well, it's staying out of trouble, and Sam McCann is not. Is just kind of an interesting
well, this is the
thing.
hope.
And he'll be on the ballot. So
he's on the ballot. He's got that conservative label. So if anyone, it's not a majority of voters in Illinois who are really animated by these issues. But if you are strongly anti-abortion, if you are strongly believe that same-sex marriage is not the way to go, then this is an alternative, or at least that's what he's hoping people see is an alternative.
Well, we've talked about abortion and gay rights. Let's talk about guns. Daisy, how many controversies are there? We're not just doing it for that reason. But as of last week, an account, and I know the Belleville newspaper did something on it, but 26 counties have now declared themselves gun sanctuaries. I know one of them in Central Illinois area is Christian County. I think I don't think it's been brought up in Sangamon County, although I think people tried. Daisy, I know you've done some reporting on this. These county boards downstate are making a statement. What's the statement, and can they do this?
Well, yeah, I think this is more of a play on that word or phrase, sanctuary cities, that have been kind of going around in the last few years, past year more likely, which will limit federal immigration or local agents to collaborate with federal immigration
And that's one
officials.
of the things that, the governor even signed a bill.
So gun sanctuary advocates want those same protections for themselves. They want to be protected from any of these gun legislation ideas that have been going on in the General Assembly. So there's the question of legality, like you said, Bernie, because some of these county gun sanctuary resolutions, what they would do is basically not accept any legislation that is
If they
signed
don't
by
like
the
gun
governor.
control, and if bump stocks happen to be banned and then somebody has one, they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, and
that
then
kind of thing.
some counties are saying, well, this is more of us saying something to legislators in Springfield.
It's probably kind of
Yes.
protesting that Chicago thing. Of course, Chicago, before Illinois was forced by a Supreme Court decision to have concealed carry, Chicago was one of the last holdouts, if not the last holdout, to get that, because Chicago was always very gun control oriented.
Well, they had a handgun ban.
And they had a handgun ban. You couldn't even own one in your own home. And then it was a Chicago man who sued for protection in his own neighborhood who got that overturned some time ago.
Well, that was D.C. That was the District of Columbia ban that first started with the handgun.
Okay, sorry.
The Chicago man was
You
concealed
used to
carry.
work for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, so you know this better than I. So please correct me. Thank you.
No, but I mean, it's relevant this week, actually, because that case, D.C. versus Heller, came up in the context of our first conversation. That was the handgun ban in Washington, D.C. Somebody sued about that, got it overturned. Then when the case was continuing to be litigated, as often happens, we usually stop hearing about a case when the Supreme Court resolves it, but often it continues in litigation to figure out the details of how it's going to be implemented. And in a subsequent incarnation of the District of Columbia versus Heller case, an appellate judge by the name of Brett Kavanaugh weighed in and said that, if the Supreme Court says that you can't ban handguns, it probably stands to reason that you can't ban assault weapons as well. And so a lot of people are paying extra attention to that opinion this week, thinking that should assault weapon bans, which the Supreme Court has declined to review since their big gun cases at the end of the 2000 decade. It's been almost a decade, I should say, since they've weighed in on these things. They're looking at this and saying, well, does this mean that if an assault weapons ban does come before the Supreme Court, Judge Kavanaugh would be another vote potentially to overturn it?
Well, certainly a matter that we're going to hear a lot about as we get into hearings for the Supreme Court Justice, confirmation hearings in Washington. See, we're talking really a lot about federal issues today. I always say we will once in a while, and this is that week. Back to the state. There was a pretty strong tiff between the candidates about an advertisement that J.B. Pritzker put out. It has to do with a Politico story that basically said that the governor, Rauner, through one of his investments in a company called Correct Care Solutions, which a GTCR fund, and GTCR is the investment company that the governor used to own.
Thomas Cressley Rauner or something. He was the R.
Right, the R was Rauner, but he left that in 2012. After that, in 2012, that company bought a healthcare organization that provides care to prisons. They, in 2014, merged with something called Correct Care Solutions. Correct Care Solutions takes care of some locations with immigrants who have come across the border.
Correct as in corrections.
Correct as in corrections. Correct
care,
Care Solutions, right. So they do prisons, but they do detention centers. I see in an AP update on that just Friday that the head of that company says they do not care for any of the children who have been separated from parents. It's only adults in a different facility, which adds fuel to the Rauner case, that he says he didn't even know that this GTCR fund had Correct Care Solutions until it was reported. He has nothing to do with it. His spokesperson from the state side said you can't claim that he made any money off it because the bigger fund that holds that company hasn't sold it, so you don't know if they made money or lost it. They asked that the ad be taken down because they thought it was improper, and the ad was very strong. It said, across the country, Democratic and Republican governors spoke out against their state supporting Donald Trump taking children away from their parents, but Bruce Rauner said he wasn't giving it any thought whatsoever. Now we learn Rauner is profiting from the policy, and his owner is an owner of a company that's been paid millions to keep children separated from their parents. The particular odd thing or questionable thing about that is that when it says Bruce Rauner said he wasn't giving it any thought,
and it plays a soundbite, right?
and it plays it saying that, he said that actually in response to a question, would you send the National Guard if asked to the border? And he said, I haven't given that any thought. At that same press conference, though, he said, I think it's a terrible program that the president has implemented, taking children away from parents. It should stop. So
It's really taken out of
it's
context.
taken completely out of context. The Pritzker people have stood behind it partly by saying, well, we put on the screen the headlines about National Guard troops at the border, but when you listen to the narrator, there's no indication of that whatsoever. So they've stuck with it, and the Rauner campaign is trying to make hay out of it. I actually haven't seen this one on TV yet. We saw it on video, but they say it's playing on TV. So
And here we are amplifying the message.
We are smart or bad for the Pritzker campaign, which accuses Rauner of telling untruths all the time, to go this far off the rails with.
I mean, it seems pretty far out there in terms of, people take liberties and exaggerate things with campaign ads. I mean, I remember once saw a mailer that had a picture of a burglar, and it said, Senator so-and-so wants you to meet someone. And it was because he had voted against some gun rights bill. So therefore, he wants you burglars to break into your house. I mean, people take these liberties all the time. But to use video of, making it seem as though the governor was talking about topic A when in fact he was talking about topic G.
Right. And he actually disagrees with,
and
he
actually
agrees
said
with the other
things,
candidate. Right.
that were more on point on topic A. That really seems to be not standard operating, not what's considered within the bounds of acceptable.
Well, certainly cedes some of the high ground, I'll tell you that.
And,
exactly.
and as we're firing up for November, I wonder if we're going to keep seeing more things like this, where these liberties are taken.
Well, we've gotten kind of used to that, unfortunately, and both of these candidates are among the most wealthy we've ever seen, so there's kind of an unlimited amount of money that will be thrown into ads, online ads as well as TV ads.
And of course, the Rauner administration is running ads now quoting Chris Kennedy and Daniel Biss, the two.
Well, not the administration, the campaign.
Excuse me, the campaign.
Right,
Yes,
and I was going to
thank
mention
you.
that because Daisy, you and I were co-panelists on a debate when we had the Democratic candidates, and it was after that Daniel Biss said these very strong things that. J.B. Pritzker is Mike Madigan's candidate, and that's one of the clips right there from the UIS campus that is used. So, is that fair, Daisy? Because both Biss and Kennedy have now endorsed J.B. Pritzker after the primary, although they said those damaging things. And Kennedy, one of the quotes they had was he's pay-to-play candidate status quo because he talked to Rod Blagojevich about being appointed state treasurer or whatever.
Right. I mean,
so is it fair, or is it just part of this whole thing?
Well, Pritzker, Biss actually took a little while before he actually endorsed Pritzker after the primaries.
But then he did endorse
Right,
him.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if it's a fair play.
This is why you don't. Politicians. What was the Ronald thing that was always attributed to Ronald Reagan? Never speak ill of a fellow Republican.
The 11th commandment.
Yes, and that's why people tend to not go as far in their criticism in primaries, because ultimately, if you are going to come together, but I think we did see this was a very bitter primary.
It was. I mean, and then I think a lot of these comments were fueled after allegations of sexual harassment within Madigan's office and how those allegations were handled, and Madigan
Get
did
the
not
good
do a
old
really
boys
good
outta
job,
here.
right?
Yeah.
So I think we were trying to get, or at least these candidates were trying to get Pritzker to respond to these, to say something.
And it's interesting. I sometimes go. They are open meetings. I go when I can. Democratic committee called Precinct Committeeman in Springfield, the Sangamon County Party. And one time, Bill Houlihan, who is a top aide to Senator Durbin, but on the political side, he's on the Democratic State Central Committee. He gave just stood up and said, people should tell Daniel Biss, and I think he was mentioning Biss as opposed to Kennedy then, but both of them, quit down-talking the candidate who's probably going to win this because it'll be used against him. And, well, here we are, and it's on TV, it's being used against him. That's just political reality. Bill's been doing this for a while, so.
Well, and I'm sure we're going to see the Democratic campaign, Pritzker campaign, using Jeannie Ives, if we haven't already, against some of her comments against Governor Rauner. So
right. Well,
tit for tat.
And truly, Governor Rauner, during the campaign, when Jeannie Ives and she's, of course, the conservative state representative from Wheaton who, came within 3 points of defeating Bruce Rauner in the primary over issues like abortion and the transgender identification bill. She clearly said, he lied about me, and I'll vote for him, but I'll only endorse him if he spends $1 million saying he lied about me, because clips of her just saying, that's no way to treat the powerful Speaker of the House, Governor, because you can't get anything done if you keep insulting him. And the governor ran these ads saying Jeannie Ives is Mike Madigan's favorite Republican, which enraged people on the right and Jeannie Ives, and probably, I think it helped him win, but it also really upset the people on the right who were with Jeannie Ives at the time.
And by the way, is patently false. I mean, Jeannie Ives
Right.
is about as conservative as you
Madigan
get.
person. Right. She was just,
House.
but just saying those words,
Right.
Madigan and powerful speaker, allowed the Rauner campaign through whatever permutation they wanted to say, oh, look, and put words in her mouth, really, by using her words out of context. Speaking of people who may or may not be targets in a campaign, the People's Pledge came out this week. Governor Rauner was in Marion. Jim Durkin, the Republican leader of the House, was in Elmhurst, with some other people saying they want everybody running for Illinois House to take the People's Pledge, saying they want a vote for term limits or legislators to do something to get them, which I assume means a constitutional amendment, and that they would vote for anyone but Mike Madigan. Now, that's easy for Republicans to say for Speaker of the House. And they want Democrats to say it too. The governor's been talking about this kind of pledge for a while on the campaign trail. Does this, the governor's been bashing Mike Madigan and his leadership and, how he controls everything, despite there have been 3 Republican governors in the last 30 years during the time Madigan was Speaker. Will this work as Republicans keep attacking Madigan and tying Madigan to every Democratic candidate, or are people maybe beyond that because we've heard it so much from the millions of dollars in ads that Bruce Rauner has run?
I mean, we'll wait and see. Mike Madigan is the least popular politician in the state, according to polling. As the speaker himself has said, I wouldn't be very popular if somebody spent millions of dollars, relentlessly
I know some bad stuff about you, I'm sure.
But will it work? I mean, it's proven to be an effective message under Governor Rauner in a way it hasn't been in the past. It's ridiculous, though, to expect Democrats to take this pledge. And by the way, how many terms has Jim Durkin been in the state legislature?
I think he's been in something like 20 years.
Yeah, and off and on. And what about Bill Brady, the Senate Republican leader? I mean, there are plenty of Republicans
for a while too, and he won his first House term by about 6 votes over Gordon Raup, but that's a long time ago.
And Congressman Shimkus, as I recall, was a big fan of term limits, and
Until
that didn't
he was
work
asked
out
by
so well.
Denny Hastert and President Bush to stay in office.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it on that. Brian Mackey, Daisy Contreras, thanks for your help. Thank you for watching. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.